First Sergeant, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm First Sergeant George Green. I'm the headquarters and support company First Sergeant for the Medical Center of Excellence.
Thank you and good morning, and I really appreciate you having this conversation with me.
Of course.
So, disclaimer, the reason why I'm having this conversation or having multiple conversations is because along my career, I'm more of an inward person, and it's hard for me to ask for help and seek ways of how I can improve, one, my communication skills, but also my conflict resolution. I tend to get riled up or fired up, as we would say, when I see things that are not right, and sometimes my best course of action is not the best course of action. So to give you an example, me and some of my coworkers were having some difficulties, and it just got to the point where I cussed everybody out. And looking back, that was not the best course of action or the most appropriate way that I should have handled that. But in that moment, that's what I felt I needed to do. And what would your guidance be if I called you up and was like, this happened to me and I want to resolve my relationships with my coworkers when, I was using a bunch of foul language and I was just very, very angry at that time?
No, that's an unfortunate situation. I would want to know the full story. And I say, hey, Joe Sergeant Thomas, sit down. Talk to me. Tell me what happened. Right? Start from the beginning, right? And you would tell me what happened. And then I do that mainly because sometimes when people just talk about what happened, from their perspective, because everybody has their own perspective, right? Talk about what happened. Sometimes they can kind of realize where they were out of pocket during that conversation, right? When they're recapping that. And then for me, it gives me a full understanding of your frame of mind during the incident. And if you can recall what other people said or did that caused you to have that reaction, just so I can get a better understanding of what happened, right? So I would need some details, but ultimately, after that, after you talk to me, I would say, how do you feel that you handled that? Seriously, how do you feel? Right? Because obviously you're coming to me for a reason. You're coming to me for a reason. You feel some type of way about this that you felt like you could have done better. So how did those actions make you feel now that you've had some time to think about it, right? And I would assume you give me some feedback, like, hey, maybe you make me feel so good or whatever. I wish I would have handled that differently. And then I would tell you that, they say before you're a 68 whiskey, you're a rifleman, right? But I believe before you're a soldier, we're all human beings, right? We're all human beings. We're going to make mistakes. We have emotions. We have personal pride. But we're also in the business of people, right? The business of people. And I think our most valuable resources are people, our connections with each other, right? So my personal philosophy is that if I offend somebody, upset somebody, it hurts me. It hurts me personally, right? Whether you're an extrovert or introvert, letting that person know or letting those people know that, hey, you know what? I apologize, right? I would advise you to do that. Now, I think that takes a certain level of pride, and sometimes it's much easier said than done, depending on how heated the situation was. But going to those individuals, especially if they're your peers, and saying, hey, you know what? The other day, I'm sorry. I apologize, right? Irregardless of how it made me feel, even if you're warranted in your feelings, I think that building that connection with those peers, those other human beings, just like I said, is important. It's important, and realizing that, hey, I could have took better actions, and then having maybe that'll open up a conversation, and maybe the person on the other end will say, you know what, you're right. I appreciate that. And at the same time, we should have done some of those things to get you to that point, right? I think so many people don't realize no matter what rank you are, whether you're a junior soldier or a general officer, we all have personal things happening in our lives. We all have personal things happening in our lives, and you never know when somebody walks in the door that day, exactly what's going on with them. So if something seems out of proportion, it's probably something deeper than that. So that would be some of the starting conversations that I would have with you.
How would you help me resolve those issues with the coworkers? Should I apologize? Should I do some self-reflection? Should I go to behavioral health? Like, what resources or what plan of action would you give me in order to repair those relationships?
Well, like I said, one, I would want to know all the details of what happened. Like, tell me what happened, walk me through it. But ultimately, is this a common occurrence for you, right? Do you find yourself, losing your military bearing and not able to handle the normal pressures of being a leader or being in the military. And if this is a common occurrence, or you have some deeper personal matters going on that are affecting your life, yeah, it may be a referral. Hey, well, maybe you should seek behavioral health, right? Or I'm an A Romeo, master resiliency trainer, right? Applying some of those skills and talking about, hey, you use some of these skills from MRT. Maybe they can help you cope with some of that. And it really depends, right? Like, without knowing the situation, what were the personal matters going on, those references will come in there. I think MRT is something you can do irregardless if there's personal matters going on. And what I always try to tell people is, it doesn't matter how competent you are. It doesn't matter what your rank is. You never want a slip up, something like, hey, I got my uniform jacked up, I haven't got my haircut. You don't want something to define who you are as your character, right? So there was one incident where, hey, you had all these things happening in your life, and then you went to work one day, and that was just the straw that broke the camel's back, and you lost it. I do think that's where warrants an apology, right? Warrants an apology. Now, if it was on their end and they did some egregious things, you could possibly, have a talk with that individual. Maybe it's best to get a unbiased third-party person, right? Like if I was the supervisor, then I could facilitate something like that, because 9 times out of 10, there's a miscommunication happening with people, right? When people get mad at somebody else, I feel like that's a miscommunication, right? It's just a matter of, you felt some way, you perceived it somehow, and I perceived it a different way. Now, there's times where some people just do things to get under your skin, but ultimately, as soldiers and as leaders, we have to have that military bearing with the understanding and the empathetic understanding that we are human beings. And sometimes our personal lives and personal feelings, they can interfere with maintaining that military bearing. And it's not a fault, right? It's not a sign of weakness. We should try our best to maintain that, but ultimately things happen. So I would definitely say, talk to those individuals, let them know how you feel. Maybe they don't know how you feel about it, and go from there.
So, First Sergeant, one of the things that I admire about you is your ability to communicate. And what I mean by communicate is that when the receiver is receiving the information, they comprehend the information that they are receiving. Is that a learned or a taught skill?
First of all, I appreciate that. I really do feel sometimes. No, I don't feel like it's a learned skill, and I'm not trying to say, hey, I'm the best public speaker, but for me, it's who I am, right? It's who I am, and I truly mean this. When I people always ask me, like, why did you join the Army? And to me, at my point in my career, it's almost an irrelevant question. The more relevant question is why I'm still in the Army, right? It's because I just love being in the Army. I love being a leader, and I love taking care of people. I care. I genuinely care, right? So when I talk to individuals, I want them to see that and feel that. And it's not because I'm a first sergeant or you're a drill sergeant, right? I mean, you can tell when someone is genuine and authentic when they're talking to you, right? And I mean that. So I do think that, being exposed to different things in the military, getting out there leading cadences throughout your, as a young NCO, or being in front of formations, giving classes, Sergeant Audie Murphy, right? I mean, if you're not used to, or if you're not feeling comfortable in pressured situations to talk to people, those things all help, right? So I'm not going to say that I was born and I'm the way that I am, but everything helps. And then just trying to read off that individual, because you can tell when you're having a conversation with somebody and they're just not getting it, right? Like your intent is not coming across, right? So yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Can you share when you had to deal with adversity in your career and how it could directly contribute to the desired outcomes by being proactive with your release?
Yeah. I was thinking about this, and like many people, I've had multiple adversities, right? I'll say one that's within the last 5 years. I came to an organization, and I was new to the organization. I was in a mid-level supervisory role, and when I arrived there, the relationship between me and my supervisor, my rater, it's a new relationship, right? He doesn't know me, I don't know him, and I felt that throughout the rating period, he had his favorites. This was just my perception. Which then led to time for NCOER. NCOER comes around. I wasn't counseled throughout the rating period, even though I asked several times, like, hey, I'm on initial counseling, I've done quarterly counselings. and I felt like I wasn't getting, what I deserved. Not that I thought I was the best. I know I just got there, but I just felt like that relationship wasn't there. And that my NCOER and my career was, could potentially suffer or take a hit from this experience. So, what I did throughout that time period, throughout that year, is that I would stay true to myself, right? I would stay true to myself, and I will let people know all the time, if you feel like you have to, I'm trying to think of a political word. If you feel like you have to get really close to your supervisor and do things unnaturally that you wouldn't normally do, it's probably not worth it, right? It's probably not worth it. I say you stay authentic to who you are, and you realize that you try to let your body of work speak for itself, right?
So what if I came to you and I said I'm being authentic to who I am, but I'm tired of being alone?
Okay, so if you said that you're tired of being alone, right?
I'm tired of standing by myself, but I want to remain true to who I am, but who I am in my work environment causes me to be the black sheep.
Yeah. Well, what I would tell you is, first of all, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And I think that some people, it depends on how you define alone, right? You think about the term above your peers, right? Somebody is shining above their peers. In that sense, they're alone too, right? If your peers are here and you're excelling, you're alone. You're alone at the top, right? Now, oftentimes you're gonna get people that that hate, right? You're gonna be some haters out there that don't want to see you shining. They don't want to see you shining. So I don't think being alone is where you're at. And you also got to realize that if your peers are here and you're above and you're alone, you have subordinates underneath you looking up to you. You're truly not alone, right? Your peer group or whatever the case may be, you may feel alone in that sense, but it depends on how you define success, right? And I never define success by rank, awards, but truly, what's the impact that you're making to your subordinates, right? So I would question you and say, I don't think that you're alone. I don't think that you're alone. You can feel lonely, right? But that's when you have mentors that you reach out to, right? You have somebody outside the organization that's a mentor, and you give them a phone call, or you link up with somebody else. Hey, go to lunch and talk to them. Just because they're in your immediate organization, you may feel alone. You're not alone. You're not alone. And I think that in that sense, being alone is, hey, I'll take that any day. I'll take it. If everybody else is not doing the standard and I'm going above it, well, then I'll be alone, right? I think that's appropriate.
So can we go back to when you're being your authentic self in regards to your remedies?
So absolutely. So like I said, I wasn't going to do anything extra because I feel like I am my authentic self. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to do right by my soldiers. I'm going to do what I feel I need to do as a leader. And of course, I'm going to keep my supervisor informed, right, and continue to push for, hey, can we get these counselings going on? And I think that because the individual saw that I wasn't going to necessarily conform to, being in the in-group, that I was going to be alone, that's the way that I was operating, because it was what I felt my sound judgment and leadership I was supposed to do. I needed to do for the organization that we were in. So, yeah, I think that in a lot of cases, people don't say anything, right? People don't say anything. They try to please their supervisors and do things and kind of, and there's nothing wrong with conformity, right? I'm not saying that in a total concept, right? But I mean, it's if you feel like you have to do that, it's okay, right? It's okay. But what I would say to individuals is that at what point are you losing who you are just to please somebody else over a sheet of paper that has a grade on it, right? I think if you're doing right, it matters what your soldiers think and how you personally feel at the end. Absolutely.
So what would you say to people or some NCOs who say your evaluation writes itself versus you have to work towards your evaluation?
Yeah, I do think it writes itself. Now, in a literal sense, it does not write itself, right? But I always tell people this. I don't care what anybody says. Nobody cares about your career more than you, right? You need to keep a log. Use your support form, right? The Army has systems in place. Use your support form. Log what you do. Because at the end of the year, you need to account for what you did, right? If you leave your career in somebody else's hands, yeah, you could get lucky. Maybe some people have been lucky for years and had these phenomenal leaders that took care of them. But if you leave your career in somebody else's hands, ultimately, you're doing yourself a disservice. Because even the best leaders, keep records of what their soldiers do. There's some things that you do and you're like, oh wow, supervisor forgot about that. But you know what? That could be the thing that sets it from, exceeded the standard, far exceeded the standard, right? These things are important. And as a raider and as a supervisor, I always think about this. I'm going to give you what you deserve, because behind every soldier, there's a family, right? People are married, have kids, support their parents, whatever the case is. You never know what that is, what's behind that soldier. However, you're going to get what you deserve, right? And with the realization that if you rate 5 people, not all 5 are number 1, right? Mathematically impossible, right? So having that dialogue is important, yeah, for sure.
So were you able to resolve that issue that you had when you first arrived to your duty station?
I would say that, was it resolved? It wasn't truly resolved, but I think that there was some compromises, right? Some compromises that I was willing to make. However, I do think they got better. It got better, right? It got better, and then ultimately that individual had left the organization and kind of got like the fresh start. Where, okay, I don't have to feel like my back's against the wall and I have to prove myself every day. So, but no, definitely. But I also think back, well, if I wasn't proactive, what position would I be in, right? So it was resolved, but let's just say a 50% resolution where things were better than it could have been had I not taken action. And I know a lot of people that submit to that, and then next thing you know, their careers are impacted by it. It's wrong. It's poor leadership. It's poor leadership. That counseling needs to happen. That dialogue, that care needs to be through. So yeah.
So what if I come to you and I'm like, First Sergeant, like I truly don't feel comfortable with trying to push my leadership to have those conversations to take care of myself.
Okay.
Like I don't have the personal courage.
And you're a sergeant first class as a drill sergeant. What I'll tell you is, one, if you're coming to me, you're coming to me specifically for a reason, right? We must know each other, right? And I would tell you that I think that you do have that personal courage, right? I think that you do. First, I'm going to try to instill that pride and confidence in yourself, right? And I really do. I think that if that individual, maybe the situation that they're in is making them feel like that, but you got to sergeant first class for a reason. You did things in your career for a reason. Now, some individuals are more reluctant to have that conversation with individuals, but I will tell you sometimes, talk about the accomplishments that you've done. Give you some pointers on, hey, you don't need to come in there guns blazing, right? But you should have that conversation, because it is your family, it is your career that's on the line. But ultimately, I think that if we knew each other, I'd be focusing on trying to show you that you do have that personal courage, right? It's going to be awkward, it's going to feel uncomfortable, or whatever the case may be. But give me some pointers. Like if you told me the situation of who they are and kind of backgrounds. Yeah, I would definitely help you out. And I would also tell you that there are other avenues of approach too, right? Every layer has an open door policy, right? And I know that some people are reluctant to use open door policy, right? I don't care what you say about whistleblowing and repercussions. I mean, and we hope that doesn't happen. But I would recommend that. Is there a leader in the chain that you feel comfortable talking to? Right? If you say yes, then I would say, you can use that. I would of course advise you to use that direct approach with the individual and give some pointers first, though. Absolutely.
That's great advice. So, when communicating with peers and senior leaders, do you have like a formal or defined approach, or is it just all natural?
No. And look, I'm not going to say it's all natural, but I don't have a defined approach. I really do think that I try to stay the same person with everyone I talk to. Right now, of course, there's different settings. There's briefings, as opposed to having a conversation like this. But ultimately, I think that if you remain professional, you're competent and confident in what you're talking about. The thing that you need to display is your passion and your care, depending on what the situation is, right? Your passion and your care. I think that's the best approach. And you got to realize that when you're talking to very senior leaders, time is precious too, right? Like, is it worthwhile having a little elevator pitch ready for when you get it? You get before that individual, you can be concise and to the point of what you're trying to get across, while still displaying the appropriate passion and care. Yeah, that's probably worthwhile too, but ultimately not necessarily a defined approach, right? I mean, if I'm talking to Sergeant Lewis and she comes in, she's the most important person to me at that point in time, and I really do try that. Is it possible 100% of the time? No, right? It's not. But if you make an effort to make it that way every time, you can, right? So that's outside of that. There's no defined approach in the language or the tone, right? It just depends on the situation for sure.
Well, I think you've already kind of answered my question is about having like a physical conversation. So I know that sometimes when we have physical conversations, we can kind of tell if the person is receiving or not receiving that information. Can you give some tips or pointers like while you're in that moment and you're sending out your information and the person is truly not receiving it, how you can kind of maneuver to ensure that what you are physically coming out of your mouth is received and the intent that you're trying to receive it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that when you're talking to somebody, you know, you can use visual cues and see if somebody has that, oh my God, I have no idea what you're talking about face on, and use those nonverbals, but also, you know, reading back or getting some feedback from somebody. Hey, sometimes you know what I'm talking about? Like, do you understand what I'm saying? And then if you don't, and I always try to ask somebody, I always try to make somebody feel like they know they can say something if they're not getting it. Like, hey, if you're not understanding what I'm saying, you can tell me. It's not going to hurt my feelings, right? I just want to make sure that we're on the same sheet of music, right? Or, you know, getting that feedback. And sometimes people aren't direct. It's something that we use as an instructor, right? You teach something, and then maybe you ask somebody a question about it and see if they give the information back. Or, hey, if this is a work relationship and you're my supporting Sergeant Thomas, I need to do X, Y, and Z. And then afterwards, I say, hey, you know, just read it back to me, make sure we got the plan. We're on the same sheet of music. Or is there any gaps that I'm missing, or whatever the case? Because somebody can't fill in the gaps of information if they don't understand what the information was, right? So there are little tips and tricks, but ultimately you have to build that relationship with somebody that you're talking to so that they can feel comfortable and know you, that they can ask that question. Some people can be intimidating, right? You don't want to be the one in a room full of 5 people or 10 people, and you're the only one that you feel like you don't understand what's going on, right? I think building that rapport and that understanding that, hey, if y'all aren't understanding what I'm saying, or if there's a better way, please let me know, because I'm not going to be offended by it.
So do you have an effective communication style that others that can use?
Like I said, I don't. For me personally, I don't. It's not an effect. It's not a style that I use, right? At least I don't attribute to a style. I want to know the person that I'm talking to, and even if I don't know the person I'm talking to, it depends on the situation that they're coming in. Somebody's coming in with a personal concern. Somebody's coming in with a professional concern. You know, the more information that I can gather before talking to that individual, the better off that I'm going to be, right? If you're having personal problems with your children, I think it would be good if I knew, ages of your children, names, your household situation, whatever the case may be, because especially as a leader, I mean, that's leadership. That's knowing your soldiers, right? And if you truly know your soldiers, I think you can take that conversation to the next level, where it's just hey, this is a leader just checking the block, doing their job, having the conversation, or this is the leader like, man, when you leave there, you feel like, man, this person really truly cares about who I am. So I would say that's an approach that I would do, is, carve out the time, invest in your people, know the people that you're talking to, and then make that person feel like that conversation is important to you, right? And you can do that and hear the information. If you need to write things down so you don't forget something, I mean, these are all little things, but they add up towards the end, because ultimately, especially if there's something where you owe them something back, you need to close that, right? If Sergeant Thomas comes to me and says, hey, I got these issues going on, it's one thing if you're just venting, but if you're looking for some action from me, right? If you're looking for some action from me, then I need to make sure that I have a clear understanding of what I need to do in order to help you. Because if I don't, and I just start going off, or I forget about it, that's terrible, right? So understanding my obligations in the conversation as well is important in those.
So looking back on your career, how did you get to this point in moment in time? Like, who is this person you're being?
My dad he's a retired sergeant major, and I'll tell you what, when I was in high school, I didn't want to join. I'm just going to be honest, right? I wanted to go to college. College options weren't looking so hot. My dad said, hey, how about you join the reserves? I said, sure, I'll join the reserves. So I joined the reserves, and I did went to basic, AIT, or I went to one drill, and then I switched to active duty, right? And the reason why I switched to active duty is when I got to my reserve unit, I felt like, I kind of liked the Army. I was young, fit, motivated, and I think that I felt like it was too easy. Like, hey, the Army's easy. They say you do X, Y, Z, you do X, Y, Z, you're going to be good to go, right? Like, and I'll tell you, I was fortunate in my first couple of duty stations. I had excellent leaders, right, on the NCO support channel and officers that motivated me, because I think that's the most difficult part, right? Retention is rough right now. I think first duty assignment, first line supervisors, that's a hard job right now, retaining these individuals. So luckily for me, I got a taste of what good leadership looks like, and I felt like, wow, if I can do these things, I think I was pretty good at shooting right off the bat. I don't know, and I just always been a hungry person, right? Like, hey, if there's an opportunity, you want to do color guard, sure, I'll do color guard, whatever the case may be. I'm a 68 kilo, which is a medical lab tech, so I didn't always have the most HUA opportunities, but I took advantage of the opportunities that I had, and of course then I got married, and children got a little bit more mature and focused on more executive level things like college that I need to accomplish. But ultimately I credit it to early on having good leaders. I also attribute to that there's a middle section where you had some not so good leaders, right? And I think that at that point in time, you can feel stuck in that situation. But what I always try to tell myself, if I don't like how sergeant such and such is, I'm gonna remember this for when I get in that situation, that I can make it better for my soldiers, right? And take care of them in a way that I feel that they should be taken care of. And that all in itself is kind of everybody has a different definition of what taking care of soldiers is, and sometimes what a soldier wants is not always what a soldier needs, right? I think that's the harsh reality of it. But yeah, so I attribute all of that. The people that I surrounded myself with, I've had some good people that I linked in with. I've been fortunate enough I've never picked a duty station before in my entire career. I've been fortunate enough to have some good leaders along the way, but yeah, that's where I'm at today for sure. You're close to that.
That is pretty good and awesome. Can you give an instance where you had to settle a conflict between two individuals or multiple individuals?
Yeah, sure. When I was so I had some individuals that were in a professional setting, and they did not get along. They did not get along. Kind of similar to what you were talking about before, where there was an incident where some lines were crossed personally, right? Cussing out in front of junior soldiers and everything like that. Those were my soldiers. So what I did was first, I talked to them individually, right? Sat down with one, said, hey, tell me what happened. From your perspective, tell me what happened. I listened what happened. Talk to the other person. Tell me what happened. I listen what happened. Separately, I told them that, irregardless of what happened and how you felt, losing your military bearing and cussing people out, especially in front of junior soldiers, that's not acceptable, right? That's not acceptable at any point in time. Then I sat down and had those individuals talk together, and I kind of led that conversation. But it was interesting. It was interesting because it's just like any other human conversation where it's their side versus their side, and somewhere in the middle there is the truth. But ultimately, I think that when you refrain from having those open and honest conversations with individuals, that's how those conflicts happen, right? Because if I'm feeling some type of way about Drill Sergeant Thomas, and I'm your peer and I work with you, and I never really, get to know you or try to have that conversation with you, then I continue perceiving you a certain way, right? If I'm not making an effort, and not saying you can make an effort with every person like that, but oftentimes, like I say, it's a misinterpretation. Sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes it's not. And these two individuals, I'll tell you that there were some deep things that happened in between them, right? And I told them, hey, irregardless, you don't need to be best friends. You don't need to hang out on the weekends, but when you're at work, you need to conduct yourselves professionally, right? You need to conduct yourselves professionally. At the same time, you don't need to avoid each other. I hope that we can be mature enough to realize that, hey, we had personal differences between us, but At the end of the day, we're professionals. We're going to move on from this. And like I said, you don't need to be best friends, but you need to do your job as senior NCOs and execute the mission. Oh, that was it.
So do you think that that misperception or miscommunication leads to a lot of conflict?
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. I do. You know, you think about the NCO creed and it's about knowing your soldiers, and it's weird because it's about knowing your peers, the people that you work with. I think that morale is directly tied to productivity. If the morale is high, the productivity will be high, right? As leaders, you have to be working towards building that team, right? They talk about building a team with mutual trust, right? Like having that team of trust. Like how do you build that? You can build that as peers amongst each other, and you should be working to build that as a senior person in charge of a group of people, right? Like that's why would you not want a team that feels a part of a team, of a family? You think about, I know from my experiences, I spent a little over 5 years at Fort Bragg and just road to war, pre-deployment training, the things that you go through when you deploy with these people, you build a connection, right? And I don't care if you're in a TDA unit and you're at Med COE, you're in a hospital, in a department, it can often feel like that we are there to just do these certain jobs, right? Like, hey, you're a drill sergeant, your job is to do PT, take them to school, bring them back, do counselings, right? No, but ultimately, like, what can you be doing to build that trust, right? Because oftentimes, if I trust you, if I truly trust you, there's levels of trust, don't get me wrong, right? There's a level of trust, but if I trust you, and if you say something that maybe initially I'm like, wow, maybe that didn't sound right, but I trust you, like, okay, well, obviously she didn't mean it like that, right? But if you don't have that, if your morale, you're not working to build that team, you're gonna have that conflict. And conflict doesn't have to always happen in one instance, right? It's that one time that I was like, yeah, well, maybe she didn't mean it like that. But then the next time a situation happens and I'm like, wow, okay, well, you know, these things build up over time, right? So that's why you have to work on building your team. And even as peers, like I said, even as peers, just letting other people know, like, you value their opinions, right? I'm not, you know, we're all peers. I'm not here to try to outshine you, and you know, and if you outshine me, I'm not going to be offended by it, right? We're here to work together as a team for the mission. So if you think about that, right, and you think about if you're tight with a group of people, oftentimes you're not going to have, I mean, it's like family. Family, yeah, you're going to butt heads every now and then. You're going to have disagreement, but at the end of the day, you know that, hey, that's my battle buddy. They have my back. We're not going to agree with everything, but hey, show goes on, the mission continues, right? So,
Do you think resiliency and motivation go hand in hand, or are they two separate entities?
well, they kind of go hand in hand, right? If you have a hard time staying resilient, right, it's going to be hard for you to be motivated, right? It's going to be hard for you to be motivated. You see sometimes people come into organizations, maybe as a new drill sergeant, they're super motivated, right? And they get here and they're like, oh man, they hit this wall, and sometimes they even decline, right? So a lot of that is due to the resilience, and sometimes that's tied to leadership, the environment that they're in, but ultimately, resilience is the key to keeping your motivation high, right? It's the key to keeping your motivation high. Realize that you can't control everything. You can't control everything, and you can control what's in your scope, and even that is easier said than done. You know, you can control, you know, how you feel in your actions, but yeah, absolutely. I think that if you're constantly getting kicked in the teeth and you don't have a way to cope with that, you're not going to show up. You're not going to show up, right? I know that drill sergeants are trained in MRT, right? You know, they go through resiliency training, and I think when I think of specific duties like drill sergeant, recruiter, we're so focused on the soldier. We're so focused on the soldier, the student, soldier medic, whatever the case may be, that, you know, oftentimes we forget that those skills are also for us. Those skills are also for us. It's easy to be a selfless leader who wants to give to your subordinates, but sometimes, you know, we need to check our battle buddies. We need to check ourselves and apply those same skills, because, well, we're not immune to that. We're not immune to problems, right? So I say they do go hand in hand in that instance, right, for sure. If you don't have resilience, that motivation is going to die out.
So now I'm going to ask some conclusion questions.
Yeah.
So leadership is essential. In your own words, how would you define it and how would you apply it?
Yeah, you know, I think the book definition is great, but when you talk about influencing and motivating people for the better of the organization, right? And I also think about, for me, how as a leader can I influence and motivate you to want to do great? Right? It's one thing if I say, hey, I give you the purpose, direction, and motivation to do the job. That's fine. But how do I get you to build your own purpose, to build your own motivation? Right? I think that's where true leadership comes in. Is right. We are always grooming the next people to take over our positions. Right. So how do I lead somebody that makes them want to go above the standard? Right. Any leader can say, hey, Sergeant Lewis, do this, and this is the standard. Sergeant Lewis does it to the standard, right? But if a true leader, or so if you invest in your people and make them want to do better, right? Like, hey, what Sergeant Lewis said, I know he said right here, watch, I'm about to turn it up to right here, right? Like, so how do you instill that in your individuals? That's where the art of leadership comes in, right? Because there's a lot of it's a purpose, direction, motivation, influencing others, improving the organization. But how do you build that confidence and that desire to create winning streaks, make people want to keep doing good, right? There's little tips and tricks on how you can do that too. When I'm talking about creating winning streaks, if I know you're my subordinate and you do something, I give you a task and you do this task, and then you do it above and beyond. I need to make sure that, one, that I appreciate that, right? It wasn't just something that I said, hey, go do this and now you're done. Hey, thanks. No, I want to, especially if you did above and beyond, like, wow, hey, Joe Sartano, man, this is great. This is phenomenal, right? Because when you do things like that, it makes people want to keep doing better, right? I think that all human beings, at least in my opinion, want to feel like, especially in this profession, want to feel like they're valued members of the team and want to feel like they're appreciated, because so many people work so hard to do things, right? So hard. You ask for a product, even to NCIC of ACFT, right? All the legwork that you put into it. Maybe you put some, you thought some extra things and you implemented it, and during execution, none of that gets noticed. Why didn't get noticed? Because you implemented it, right? Like, so I think that taking the time out for your subordinates when they're doing above and beyond and excelling, to really make them know that you've seen it, and being specific about how don't just say, hey, you did a really good job. Like, wow, I noticed that you implemented this and this, like, because it's like, oh wow, somebody's paying attention to me, right? So I think that that's what, in my opinion, separates other people, right? That how do you effectively praise somebody? How do you be an honest broker with somebody at the same time too, right? If somebody's missing the mark and it's more than just being like, hey, you're terrible at this, right? No, hey, Joe Sartano, this is where you excel. These are areas that you need to improve. And I always like to tell people, like, hey, I have areas to improve too, right? I don't want to sit here and like on stage on stage and say, hey, I'm impervious to these improvements. Like, there's areas that I want to improve at, and there's areas that I see that you need to improve at, and then truly work on helping that individual out, right? And seeing their potential. That's what I feel leadership is, right? You have some individuals that sometimes you almost get a sense that someone doesn't want to see you get on their level or surpass them, but that's not leadership. Like, how are you investing in somebody? How are you investing in grooming them to be a leader? That's what leadership should be, and that's the way that I view it.
Do you think that we don't focus enough on being a good follower and just being a good leader? And do you think being a good follower is important?
Yeah, hold on one second. Okay. Being a good follower is absolutely important, right? I do think that, can you teach and groom people to be good leaders? Yes, you can, right? But just like I said, we need followers too. You look at the retention rate, and most people don't stay in the military that long, right? They're good followers, maybe they're not good followers, and they get out of the military. But I think that when it comes to, can you teach leadership? Well, ultimately, I think that you can teach leadership to a certain degree. Like I said, there are some things that I feel some people do better. Mm-hmm. They do better either through their communication or just because that they're genuine and passionate, right? And it's difficult. You think about NCOES. How long do you go to PME before you become an E5, right? Like, some people's 2 weeks, some people's 30 days. So in 30 days, you're going to go from being a specialist in the Army to having one of the most important jobs as a direct supervisor, as an NCO, right? Like, are we doing everything that we can? I think that we're doing everything that we can, given the constraints that the Army has given us, but that's where us senior leaders come in, right? Hey, you go to that institutional domain at PME, and when you come back on the operational side, me, First Sergeant Green, I need to be talking to you about that and developing you. Right? So I think that you can develop leaders, and it is extremely important to have followers. Right? Everybody, I came in the Army as an E1. I never forget where I came from. Never forget where I came from. There's nothing wrong with being a good follower. That is important, right? And I think that that's the cycle that you're going to go through in the military. You're going to start as a follower, and you know everybody's a leader, and everybody has the potential to be that. But you have to know when to follow too. Everybody has a boss. I have a boss, right? You got to know when to follow as well. So, extremely important.
So far in your Army career, what might be some actions or non-actions you regret?
Well, I'll tell you, being a 68 CMF, one of my biggest regrets is that I have never challenged the FMB. I have never challenged the FMB.
Because?
I would say, I don't want to lie and say because I never had an opportunity, because I think that would be a lie at its core. But ultimately, yes, of course, I didn't have as many opportunities as a 68 whiskey or whatever the case may be. But looking back, there's no excuse. There's no excuse. I want to say it's because I didn't have an opportunity. Right? But ultimately, I tell people this all the time. If you want something bad enough, you will do it. Right? Just like Sergeant Audie Murphy. You hear people all the time like, well, I'm gonna go. I'm studying, I'm waiting on it. There's no perfect time, right? There's no perfect time. So that is one of my regrets, because I feel like, hey, would I be wearing the badge if I went? I don't know, right? But I would give it a shot. At this point in time in my career, I probably won't go right now, right? I'm getting a little bit towards the tail end. Not saying that you can't go at any point in time in your career. And I would recommend people go and strive for that. But that's my regret. Right? I wish I would.
If you were to create a mantra, what would that mantra be and why?
A mantra. I think that it's going to be to invest in your people. Right? Invest in your people. Right? It's so crazy. The Army has great processes and procedures and doctrine in place, but they're all ran by people. Everything is ran by people. Our biggest and most important resources is people, right? And truly investing in your people and realizing that when you're in these leadership roles, it's more than just your job. These are human beings tied to this, right? Like, everybody has a situation, everybody has a story. How you are investing in your people is crucial, right? This goes back to that leadership, right? That's the difference between Specialist Green staying in the Army or getting out of the Army, right? So I think that's really where it is. And when you hear this People First campaign, I almost think it's ridiculous, because I've always put people first. Like, what are you talking about? Like, we of course we need to put people first. I know that the Army was different, back in the day on how we treated individuals, but ultimately for me, I've always just valued the relationships. I really have, right? Like, invest in your people, right? And it will pay dividends. That's how I define success, by the success of my subordinates. Like, somebody calls you years later, like, hey, Drill Sergeant Thompson, I just want to say thank you, whatever the case may be. I don't care about the pay, the accolades, the awards, whatever the case may be. That's how I define success. So my mantra would be to invest in your people, right? Invest in your people.
So closing the loop on adversity and conflict resolution. So if you just take those little moments to invest in your people, or invest in your atmosphere or environment, you can kind of control or command and control those adverse actions that you see or perceive.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of them would be eliminated, right? And investing in your people in an individual sense, investing in your people in a collective, team building, trust building sense, of course. Yeah, why? First of all, why wouldn't you? If morale is tied to productivity, the Army loves numbers, right? We need what's the quantifiable data at the end of the year? If you can raise that quantifiable data just by raising their morale, investing in your people, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? But yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that you would have less personal conflicts.
What is one of your most significant lessons learned thus far in your career? that you can share?
Yeah, so going back to investing in people, there was a time when I was at Fort Bragg. I came there as a specialist and I left as a staff sergeant. So most of my grooming in the NCO Corps was in the 44th Medical Command. But I'll tell you that there was almost a point in time where, as an NCO, you had to be so tough love, with your soldiers, that there were opportunities missed to really build that team, right? I remember there was a point in time where if you were a junior soldier, you didn't come talk to an NCO unless they wanted to come talk to you, right? Like, you weren't just walking up to your NCOs and saying, hey, what are we doing today? You're waiting over there until we come over there and we let you know what's happening, right? So there were some missed opportunities, right? Some relationships that probably could have been more impactful if you didn't feel the pressure of being that strong standard bearer, so strong where you're unapproachable type of. And not saying that I was to that point, but still there was missed opportunities, right? Room for improvement on my behalf. And I look back at all the phenomenal soldiers that I had at that point in time, and I think, man, you know what? They were great, but who knows what it could have been? Who knows what it could have been if maybe the culture or the atmosphere was a little bit different. So.
Speaking of culture, do you think the council culture has impacted the reason why we have a retention issue, or why people spend so much time being offended, which leads to conflicts in adversity?
Yeah, and look, culture as a whole is so difficult to change, right? You hear commands coming, hey, we need to change the culture. And even within organizations that I've been in, you try to change the culture, talking about the cancel culture, though. It is rough, right? I think it's rougher among more people who are linked into the digital space and more willing and have willing on social media, canceling people, speaking their mind. I think that it is impacted some parts of the Army and made things a little bit more difficult. Because I even think about it as an instructor, and I'm sure as a drill sergeant, there are people out there that are afraid to enforce standards strictly off the fact that they don't want to get in trouble over something. They don't want to offend somebody, right? I've seen leaders be afraid to make on-the-spot corrections because they are afraid of getting in trouble. And it's not even because they're doing anything doctrinally wrong, but somebody's going to get offended by it. So I think that as individuals, we need to be aware of what the culture is, right? Aware of this cultural environment that you're in, but still realize that you can be tactful. Right? I think about it as a drill sergeant. You see somebody down in the days of you and pointing at them and cussing them out and saying fix your hair or whatever. There's different ways. To do that now, and I think that it's just about being flexible, being adaptive, and realizing that the environment of the Army is changing, and how do you change with that? And you need to change with it. Not saying to give up who you are and the values that you believe in, but you got to keep up with it, right? You got to be tactful. Bring somebody, hey, don't your hair's out of regulation. I won't call you out in front of your peers or your soldiers, whatever the case may be, but you need to fix it ASAP, right? And then move on, right? So just changing your approach, I think, is important. But cancel culture is rough. A lot of people get offended. And I think that's why you have to be more savvy on how you articulate what the problem is when your approach is. For sure.
Well, I have enjoyed our time.
Yeah.
This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming out and talking to me and sharing your knowledge so that me and staff sergeants can better navigate the waters when we go into these environments and, not necessarily have tough times, but have those moments where we just need to sit back and say, I can do this better.
Yeah. Hey, and Drill Sergeant Thompson, we've known each other for some time now, and I appreciate you inviting me, right? And I think that when you were talking back to being a more introvert, and look, I think that you're great. I think that you're great at the stuff that the Sergeant Honor Murphy Club is doing here on JPSA is phenomenal, and I appreciate the time for sure. So thank you. All right.
That was awesome.
We are professionals, non-commissioned officers, leaders.